Welcome to the Psychology and Manifestation Podcast with your host, Sudane Firestar. Discover how to tap into the power of science and spirituality, the practical and the magical, to create the life of your dreams on your terms. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of the Psychology and Manifestation Podcast with your host, Sudane Firestar. I am so happy you are here. Today's episode is an extension of the previous episode in which I talked about getting clear about what it is that you want to manifest. Because this episode, I'm going to be talking to you about being unrealistic. Because sometimes, even if something doesn't exist yet, doesn't mean that it never will. But before we get into the main part of the episode, let's chat, my dear. This is episode 10 of the podcast, and I'm still trying to figure out how I want to celebrate this milestone because it's so important to celebrate the seemingly small wins and to enjoy the journey, not just the destination, because life is about the journey, not just the destination. So when I figure out how to celebrate, I'm definitely going to circle back and let you know. All right. So going forward, the podcast is also going to get some upgrades. You're going to notice differences in the sound quality and the editing. And I'm also going to be including a video component of the podcast. So there are certain platforms where you will be able to see the video version like Spotify and YouTube. So stay tuned. And in talking about what is possible for you, I wanted to talk about something that came up in an online course I had purchased earlier in this year, in the spring. So there is someone that I admire. She's more of a practical person when it comes to business. And I had followed her a long time ago when I first started listening to podcasts, especially podcasts centering on entrepreneurship. So this was maybe 11 years ago when I was listening to this particular person. And in the spring, I started to see her pop up in my feeds more often because I wasn't following her as closely anymore. Because, I'm these days way more into the spiritual side of business, but she was circling back into my feed and I liked what I saw and I was like, okay, let me see, like she's someone I admire, let me check out her work. So I enrolled in a course that she had in the spring after first enrolling in a workshop that she offered for a few days, like a challenge. And she said something really interesting that I didn't agree with. So she had said something along the lines of, no one wants to sit and look at a talking head for an hour. And then because of that, she said that she thought it was really important for people to include slides in any kind of presentation that they were going to do. Love her, but that is so untrue. I have multiple spiritual mentors, at least the two main ones, who sit and do talking videos, like talk to camera videos all the time for their workshops and for their courses. In the past, they would use slides, or some of them still use slides now, but they use slides in a very intentional way, but it's not like they always use slides as a standard part of their presentations. They will sit and talk to the camera for an hour plus, and they're still multimillionaires. People still enroll in their offers. Just because someone tells you that there is only one way to do things doesn't mean it's true. There are so many different ways to go about doing whatever it is that you want to do in your life, and it can all work. It all gets to work. So there'll be experts who tell you that there is only one way to do things, but just follow your heart, follow your gut, listen to your intuition, and just do what you feel called to do, even if someone else tells you that's not the way that it should be done. Okay, so in the previous episode of the podcast, episode 9, I was talking to you about putting things down on your desires list, right, that really light you up. And I told you not to put down things you're supposed to include because society told you that's what you should want. For example, some people think that to have a successful life or a beautiful life, that means that you have to get married and you have to have 2.5 kids, even though I don't know what half a kid is. Or the white picket fence, these old school ideas about what it means to have a beautiful life. And these days, I see plenty of people who are married or single saying that they don't want to have kids. They don't plan to because they feel freer without them. Or some people will say that, due to the state of the world, they just don't think that it's right for them to bring children into the world at this time. But, it all gets to be possible. Whatever anyone's beliefs are, they get to live life in alignment with their own values and their own beliefs, regardless of what society says, a perfect life or a beautiful life looks like. As for myself, I always knew I wanted to be a mom. And it was so interesting. But when I was in seventh grade, I had to do an autobiography. And at that time, they had us include stories from our past, our present, and what we expected our future to look like. And when I wrote the story about my future, I wrote it as if I was a single mother by choice, even though I didn't have that term in mind yet. And I wrote down that, all of my children would have my last name. And it was so interesting because from that point forward, especially once I went into high school, because, this is back in middle school, I started to change my mind about what I wanted to have. And I started to kind of center more on the happily ever after that we see in Disney movies. And, even though I don't necessarily agree that that's the outcome, and I'm sure Disney movies have changed over the years, but I'm talking about old school Disney, like Disney of the 90s. But back then there was always like the happily ever after with the prince. And so then that became the thing that I desired. That was the thing that I wanted, because that's what, happily ever looked like. And so I started to change my mind about what parenthood and family looked like for me or could be for me in the future. And even though I am a solo mom by choice, it is my desire at some point to get married. But I just changed my idea about the order in which things get to occur in my life. And I see so many types of families. I see so many blended families. So for me, I didn't feel like things had to go in a specific order. And so I'm grateful that eventually I got back to myself and realized that I got to do life my own way, not just the way that society or the media told me my life had to go. And in the previous episode of the podcast, I forgot to mention to you to stop being realistic. As I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, it's important to be unrealistic. You are meant for an extraordinary life, not an ordinary life, not the life that everyone else has, but the life that is uniquely designed for you by you. You get to design your own life, and that's what makes life fun and playful. This idea that it doesn't have to be lived in one way according to one standard. And diversity is what makes life so much fun and so much more interesting. And I think that the more that you take chances and try things that are outside of the box that other people are not doing, the more interesting you become, and the more interesting your life becomes to you, not just to others. And when we're thinking about being unrealistic, I want you to consider that even if something doesn't exist yet, that doesn't mean that it can't be created by you or for you. So, even if you're looking for a particular job with certain benefits and it doesn't seem like it exists yet, don't tell yourself no. Maybe the company or the organization has the flexibility to create the position that you want, modify a position, or add a benefit that isn't there yet. Maybe they don't have other employees that work remotely, for example, but that doesn't mean that you can't be the first person that does. So when you're writing down the desires of your heart, write them down exactly as you desire them to be. And just forget about what you think is possible. If you're like, oh, I want this, but nobody else I know has that, or that doesn't exist yet, or yeah, that could never be possible because I've never seen that before, still write it down and go with the flow. Go with it anyway, believe that it can happen, because a lot of manifestation is about what you believe is possible. So when you're using the technique that I mentioned in previous episodes, scripting, be a storyteller. Use your imagination like a younger version of you would, the childlike version of you would. What would 3 or 5-year-old version of you do? Or what would, a 3 or 5-year-old version of you believe is possible? There are some adults that are so excellent at this, and apparently Beyoncé is one of them. And I'm so sure that you're not surprised by that. When I was scrolling on Instagram, I came across a reel that had been reposted by someone. And it was a reel that was created by Michelle Williams, a member of Destiny's Child. And she was laying on her pillow doing this casual reel. And she starts talking about working with Beyoncé and what that's like. And she mentioned that Beyoncé does not take no for an answer. She said that Beyoncé says, if I had a dream about it, that means it can happen. So basically, if Beyoncé dreamed it, she wants to see it in her reality. So anyone working with her needs to Google, call customer service to order whatever it is she says that she needs, and don't even tell her it can't happen. She always believes it can happen and that it can be done, and it can. This is how someone becomes iconic. Beyoncé, of course, is iconic. So when you are thinking about your desires, think like Beyoncé. Think that anything that you dream is possible, and that your angels, your spirit guides, the universe, God, goddesses, everyone is going to team up with you to make it happen. And also make sure, as I mentioned on a previous episode, that the things that you're adding to the list actually excite you. But I'm certain that if you are being unrealistic, that the things on your list are going to excite you as long as you believe that they are possible and you have faith that you can have whatever it is that you desire. So let's talk about some things that people once thought were impossible that became possible, or about how things, about how people thought things could only be done in one way, and then someone broke the rules and they did it a different way. When I was reading The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, he mentioned the Fosbury flop, which was a technique popularized by Dick Fosbury in the 1968 Olympics within the high jump. So the Fosbury flop became a more efficient way of doing the high jump than the former ways of doing the high jump. And it was because this person, Dick Fosbury, just decided to do things differently rather than just following what had already been done by everyone else. And it worked. And now it's really popular. And it's, at least from what I've seen, the main way that people do the high jump. You may have also seen in the media that some people used to think running a mile in 4 minutes or less was impossible until 1954 when Roger Bannister did it. So, also think about the fact that people used to think the world was flat, but then someone said it's round and discovered that it's round. And, so things are not set in stone. Things are changing all the time, and our perception of reality changes all the time. And as I've also mentioned in previous episodes, each person's perception of reality is different. We're all living our own version of reality, and we're all creating our own version of reality based on our perception of the world and ourselves. So in sum, just because something hasn't been done yet or doesn't exist yet doesn't mean it can never be done, and it doesn't mean that it can never exist. Dare to be unrealistic in your manifestations. And what can your homework be? So your homework is just to think creatively, to think unrealistically, to think what the 3 or 5-year-old version of yourself would say or do or think in terms of creativity. And then, think like Beyoncé. If you're Beyoncé and you're iconic and you believe that anything is possible for you, what are you doing? What's on your list of desires? What do you want to manifest? So embody a childlike energy, but also embody an icon who just knows that anything is possible for her and she can do whatever she wants. And the desires of her heart are possible, no matter what anyone else says or thinks or believes. Okay, my darling, that's what I have for you today. And if you enjoyed this episode in any way or it helped you, please follow the podcast on whichever platform you're listening on. And then look out for me to be on YouTube, and you can subscribe there too and follow along with the video version. Or you can watch the video version on Spotify. So look for the show to be popping up on those platforms in video format for episode 11. And if you feel like this episode would benefit anyone in your life who is working on manifesting the dreams of their heart, or they just need inspiration so that they can get excited about their future and the things that they want to call into their life, please share this episode with them. You can always just take the link and share it and send it to them by text message, email, whatever you desire to do. All right, I love you, and I look forward to speaking